Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Troy Hinkie with Urban Worm Company. Welcome to another Wiggle Wednesday. We've already got some people joined in here. Today, we're going to be talking about bioassays, but we'll give people a few minutes here just to join in. Let me kick up my my name here on the screen so that people can see. There we go. We've already got some different people checking in from around the world here. Canada, Philippines, Nick from Virginia. Looks like there's some new faces as well. Hey, Mark. Mark's our employee from Plymouth Meeting. He does all the order fulfillment and used to be an engineer. So welcome, Mark. Hey, Scorch. Just give people a few more minutes here. Not having as many people check on as normal. Anyway, hopefully some of you have heard what a bioassay is, and it's nothing new. It's basically a test. We'll be getting into the details of it, but Kurt from Central Pennsylvania. Sorry, I'm a bit quiet this morning. Just kind of got a lot going on my mind this morning. A lot happening in life lately. 5 days away from spring, though. I'm excited about that. We got winter temperatures here. It's been like 32, 35 degrees with extreme winds. Hey, Kevin from Wisconsin. Scott from Kansas. Jay Fung, welcome back. West of Oz Worms. Hey, good to see you guys. I'm going to bring up my other thing and start getting into it here since we're a couple minutes in. Let me take down this so it's not blocking the view. All right, let me bring this up here. So today we're going to talk about bioassays. So a bioassay is short for biological assay, or it's a assessment of some type of growing medium, but rather than checking like the doing a chemical analysis of it, this is using plants to make observations of things, of what's going on with the biology in there. So I guess there is some chemistry involved as well. Let me make my screen big real quick so I can see this better. So we're going to cover reasons to use bioassays, materials that you would need for a bioassay, how to run a bioassay for contaminants, and I meant to change that to running a bioassay for testing materials, and then observations and results, and then a bioassay for seed viability, just because that's a little bit different for the ingredients. And then we'll do our regular question and answer session at the end. So different reasons for using a bioassay. The main ones, you've heard us, we've been mentioning it a number of times the past couple months here, is to test for persistent herbicides. So if you were wanting to send in a sample of, like, say, manure or soil or straw or something like that to a lab to get it tested, it costs at least $400 per test. And those can only test down to 5 parts per billion, but persistent herbicides can affect plants at 1 part per billion. So if you can do a bioassay, you're going to save a whole lot of money, and you're going to see results, hopefully see results that you may not get back those same results in a lab test. Like I said, you can't test down that far, so you can see it affecting the growth. So persistent herbicides, I'll mention real quick. And we've done a live stream in the past on persistent herbicides. I'll be mentioning it a good amount today, but if you want to learn more of that in detail, you can check out on YouTube, you can check out our live stream on persistent herbicides. But persistent herbicides can affect plants at 1 part per billion, which is the equivalent of 1 drop in a Olympic-sized pool. So it doesn't take much at all for persistent herbicides to affect plants, and that's why it's great to do this bioassay. You can do bioassays as well for testing new soil or compost. So let's say you're a market gardener or a large-scale grower, and you're considering buying several tons or more of a bulk compost, but it's a new company to you, or you don't have experience with them before, or haven't gotten much feedback from them, or soil, some type of soil mix as well. it would be really good if you could test that and use a bioassay to see how it's going to affect your plants when you're trying to grow your plants. You can also use it to check for germination rates for soil or compost. So let's say you are a soil or compost manufacturer and you want to sell your product. You can test your compost for how it's going to grow seeds. So are you going to get a 90% germination rate with your product, or you're only going to get 50% germination rate? You know that you need to adjust some things before you start selling that. And then you can use it. This isn't quite as big of a thing, but you can use it for comparing effects of amendments. So if you're considering purchasing some type of amendment, really anything, biochar, some type of kelp, any type of amendment that you might use, you could mix that in and see what effects you're going to get from that as well. So those are the different reasons for using a bioassay. These are going to be the materials that you would need to run a bioassay. So commercial potting mix containing fertilizer. Normally any other time I am talking to anyone, I'm not going to recommend them getting some type of thing with a fertilizer already mixed in it, but we're doing an analysis and we need that in there. So there's a few different varieties on the market. Just any type of commercial potting mix that's going to have some type of little fertilizer in there. And then you want a quantity of at least 12 pots. The 4 to 5 inch size are good, or you can use the seed trays that have the 4-inch size. You can do more pots than that. It's good to just have at least that number of pots. They have those little 4-inch terracotta colored plastic grow pots, or even the terracotta ones. You can use those, or like I said, the seed tray. Then you want saucers for those pots, or a tray to keep them separate, or you want to at least keep them very separated. And we'll talk about that when we're doing the experiment. You just don't want water from something that is your test to go in with something with your control. So that's why you want to have saucers to keep the leachate from mixing together. And then you'll need your suspect compost or soil, whatever it is that you're wanting to test: vermicompost, compost, soil blend. So if you think maybe your soil's contaminated, directly from the ground, you can use that as well. And then the seeds, you want to plant seeds. The best ones that are going to be best for testing for some type of persistent herbicides or other type of contamination like that are going to be cucumber, bean, or pea seeds. And then that's unless you're testing for seed viability. And if you're testing for seed viability, then it's whatever seed that you're wanting to test. So cucumbers, beans, or pea seeds, any type of bean, really. Cucumber is the most common one that I see people use. And then to run a bioassay, so again, I had meant to mention that it's to test inputs, not just for contaminants, but so whatever you're wanting to test. Let's say there's a farmer who wants to give you a bunch of horse manure, and you're considering taking that horse manure in, but you don't know the history of it, and you want to test that. So you want to gather some random samples, or if it's soil blend, normally, if it's a bagged mix, you're not going to have to worry about gathering random samples because it's going to be uniform in mixture. But if you're taking something like soil from the ground or some type of manures, you want to gather random samples and then mix them all together so that they're uniform, and you're not getting like one part of the manure is in one pot and another part of the manure is in another pot. And then the more samples, the better. So if you can gather 20 samples, that's going to be great. If you can grab 30 samples, at least grab 6 to 10 or more would be better. And then I'd said that we have 12 pots. There are materials that we need are 12 pots. So we want to split those in half. So we're going to have half be a control and half be our test. So we're going to fill 6 pots or 1 tray of the 4 or 5 inch pots with straight potting soil. So nothing but your potting soil. Grab your potting soil, fill those up. And then the other half of the pots, or the starter tray, if that's what you choose to use, you're going to make a 1-to-1 mix of the compost, vermicompost, manure, whatever it is that you're wanting to test. You're going to mix one part of that with one part of the potting soil that's the same potting soil that you just used for your other ones. So you fill all those pots. You want to place your saucers under your planters, or you can use a tray, just as long as you're keeping the 6 pots of the straight potting soil separated, where they're not going to, where the leachate or any water that comes out is going to mix together. So you want to keep those separate somehow, either with saucers or trays. And then plant 3 seeds, whatever it is that you choose. Plant 3 seeds of each in each of the 12 pots. And then from there, just treat it like you would your plants that you're trying to start seeds, for growing for springtime or whatever. Water equally. Make sure that, one's not getting more water than the other. You just want to make sure that this was an equal test. Water equally regular for 2 to 3 weeks. And you're wanting to wait for 3 sets of true leaves. So when your seeds start to sprout, you get your first set of true leaves that are going to come out, and then you want to wait for 2 more sets. So you've got 3 sets of true leaves that are coming out of there. And that's going to give you enough growth that it will show you whether you've got some contamination. So that is how, I forgot to mention, for anybody that's new, if you have any comments or questions while I'm going through, since I'm alone today, if you've got any comments or questions that need to be addressed, I'm not going to see them until the end of my presentation here, but I will go back and cover any questions that you all left for me. So then once you have planted your seeds, let me take a drink real quick. Once you have planted your seeds, watered and waited for 2 to 3 weeks for your 3 true leaves to show up on your cucumber or your bean plant, you want to make your observation. So come in if you're concerned about persistent herbicides or other types of herbicides. You want to look for any difference between the control and the test plants. So your control is going to be where you have just the potting soil with fertilizer, and then your test plants are going to be your mix. So you want to observe, look for maybe stunted growth or malformation. So if you have persistent herbicide contamination, you're going to notice cupped leaves, twisted or elongated tissue. That's called epinasty. And really, I'll show you a picture here in a second here, and we can discuss more about that. And then yellowing of any new leaves or anything irregular from the control plants is going to show that you have some type of contamination. It's not necessarily going to be persistent herbicide, but especially if it's on the new leaves, it might mean that you have some other type of contamination, some other type of herbicide contamination. It's not as likely, and most other herbicides aren't going to persist as long. That's why some are known as persistent herbicides and other ones are not. But still, if something happened to get sprayed, you might have some issues. But that's what you would notice is, like yellowing of new growth, especially the leaves, or any type of irregularity. Or if you're testing amendments, if you're trying out some type of new amendment, you would want to look for, normal growth versus stunted or discoloration or anything like that. So let's say you were testing biochar and you loaded up like 70% biochar to nobody's going to do that, but 70% biochar to 30% soil, you're likely to have stunted growth. Not much nitrogen has been sent up, so you're going to have kind of yellowing plants. So you'll know that those amendments aren't necessarily bad, but if you're wanting to test the ratio of amendments that you need in your soil, you'll be able to adjust that by using these bioassays. All right, so this is just a couple pictures, and again, we had a whole live stream on persistent herbicides, but I've heard different people mention it again lately, so I just wanted to show some pictures. But persistent herbicides affect growth hormones. So you've got growth hormones in a plant that some put out some allow a plant to grow more and some hold back the growth. And so this affects both of those things where it's kind of, I explain it like if you make a balloon animal where you blow a balloon up and you get like one side's really stretchy and the other side's maybe not as stretchy. You can see on the right-hand side here, that's a soybean leaf. And where it's not a regular kind of heart-shaped leaf like it should be, it's got irregularities where one side kind of looks shrunken, or I can't think of the word, but you've got like dimples in the top there. The left-hand side, that picture is a picture of a tomato plant, blistered. That's what word I was looking for. On the right-hand side, it looks blistered there on the tops of the leaves. On the left-hand side, you've got a tomato plant. The leaves are curling. You can see in the background how the leaves are curling and kind of twisting. The stems will twist like that, or you'll have, one side, like if this is the leaf, one half might be like where it's just really shot out and the other is shrunken. It looks very abnormal, and you can tell. So that's testing for any inputs. You would, have your control where you've got 6 or more pots of a control with just the potting soil, and then 6 or more pots with your mix of potting soil with compost or horse manure, cow manure, whatever it is that you're wanting to test. If you're wanting to test for seed viability, let's say that you've got, you're a grower that you realize that you just found a package of like a huge pack of seeds that you spent a whole lot of money on, but it fell behind your cabinet for a couple of years and you didn't realize it. You want to test those seeds, or any number of reasons that you want to test for seed viability, like if you send in, or if you're looking at, Johnny's seeds or whatever like that, and it shows the germination rate, this is how they test for that. So you're going to take your 12 pots or a starter tray and use nothing but the commercial potting mix. And again, plant 2 to 3 seeds per hole, grow for 2 to 3 weeks, and then you're going to observe and calculate the germination rate. So if you've got 12 cells and 10 of your 12 cells, the seeds germinated, then you're going to, divide 10 by 12, and that will give you your germination rate. Or if you've only got 6 of the 12 cells have germinated, then you've got a 50% germination rate. So that is a way that you can calculate your seed viability in case you're wanting to do something like that as well. So that's another type of bioassay. And then we're on to our question and answer session. So I'm going to get out of here and let me get to your comments. I got to go back up and read through here, so give me just a second here. Lots of people chiming in and saying hi. No questions so far. Somebody asked, good morning, how should I know when to feed my worms? Good question. So when you've put food in there, it's best to, you want your worms to have processed everything. The best thing to do is to look for it's called the pool table effect, where if you've got, let me grab a piece of paper here. So if this is the top level of your worm bin and you put a bunch of chunky food waste on there, so these bottle caps are my food scraps, and you're putting those on top of there. You want to wait till the worms have processed that and you don't have that chunky texture on that. You want to wait for it to look like a smooth felt pool table, and that's when you'll know when to feed your worms again, or if you've noticed that the majority of food scraps have broken down. And we also have a live stream that touches on that, and I can't remember the name of it, but if you want to check back through our other live streams, we do go into that in detail. Looking for more questions. I have mites. I have white mites on the outside of my urban worm bag, crawling and migrating on the plastic connectors and metal frame. Infestation on the inside of bin. Things to do to get rid of them. Possible damage to the urban worm bag. Mites are a very common thing, and white mites, they can be a nuisance, but they're not necessarily a problem. You shouldn't have any damage to your urban worm bag. The best way to get rid of mites is going to be to leave the lid open for a few days and try and dry things out. Generally, mites come because you've put a good amount of wet stuff to be processed in and don't have a lot to soak it up, and it might be there might be excess moisture, and those conditions attract mites. So if you can leave your lid off for a couple days, let things dry out on the top, cover it with a little bit of shredded paper or some type of carbon shredded leaves, and then every time you feed any type of pest, if anyone is concerned about mites or springtails or anything like that, they're not necessarily pests, but to keep those things down, every time you feed, you want to include 2 parts brown material with every 1 part green material. So 2 parts carbon containing leaves, shredded paper, cardboard, to every 1 part food scraps that you put in there. And it's good to take some of that brown material and keep it covered so that you have dry stuff on top. And that's going to limit flies as well. I think I just accidentally skipped a bunch of questions. Let me. Thanks for answering, Raptor Grow. They helped touch on that question. How close should a grow light be to new plants? It depends on what you're growing. Usually people keep them about 12 inches above, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches, depending on what type of seed it is. Once they start to grow, you want to keep it a little bit above, but not too high, because you don't want things to stretch out. Someone else, if you want to chime in here, feel free to chime in too. Someone said, hello from Vermont. Why do you use 6 controlled pots? Could you only use 3? You could only use 3. Again, 6. I was basing this off of NC State Extension has a great page or whatever on web page on bioassays, and I was getting this from them. They and other people are the ones who use the number of 6. I would even choose more than that, so you can have as many comparisons as possible. So if you've only got three pots to compare to 3 pots, you're really not looking. There's variability that you're not really seeing much come up in just those 3 samples. So it's a lot better to have more samples. Someone said, when applying a worm cast tea, how far does 5 gallons go? Do plants just need a little mist or a good watering? So when I worked at the Rodale Institute, we were doing research with 5 gallons per acre. And you can do 5 gallons per acre. I normally go out with 10 to 20 gallons per acre, but it really doesn't take much. So you can, and also that immediately usually draws the question from people, do I need to dilute that down? You can dilute it down, or you don't need to. So you can put it straight, or if you need to dilute it down to cover that much area, then you would just dilute it down however much you need to. Next question is, if trying to keep the bin dry when adding browns, should they be sponge-like? Trying to keep the bin dry when if you're trying to dry, let's say you have excess moisture in your bin, you would want to add some dry brown material to it to soak some of that excess moisture up. If you're adding, and again, this is another live stream we did on feeding your worm bin, but if you're putting food in, you're going to have food scraps are 80 to 90% moisture. So some of that brown material that you're putting in, you want to allow enough that it's going to soak up excess moisture from the food waste, but you're going to want a little bit, since you're putting in, 2 parts brown to 1 part food scraps, you're going to want to put a little bit of moisture in there likely. And then if you're putting, this is a really hard, can be maybe confusing, but once, I'm trying to use an example here. Once things are into your bin and really getting worked, you want that good ratio of 2 to 1 wet, moist stuff. But on the very top of your bin, if you're putting in a covering at the very end, it's good to have a little bit of dry. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit moist, but it's if you can put in a dry layer of brown stuff, then that's going to deter like fruit flies and fungus gnats from coming in. They're more likely to come in on direct fruit, but if you can keep that dry layer, just a thin dry layer of brown stuff on the very top, but everything else you want to be moist. I hope I answered your question enough. Someone asked, I have a worm in, similar to urban worm bag, but drier, I think. All my harvests have been too dry, like sand. Ooh, what is the best way to add moisture? Just pour water in. I spray lots, but still dry. The best thing, so if you're pouring water in, it's likely that a lot of that water is going to hit the top and then just keep flowing through. So it's best with any type of worm bin to mist the top with buying a little spray bottle, or I think they're like $15 at the hardware store. It's like those old atomizers that they had that puts out a really fine mist. But you can purchase those and fill them with water. I can't think of the exact name of them, but those work excellent. You like pump them up, keep them full of air, and then spray out and mist a bunch of water. And those are going to put out a really fine mist that the top of your bin is going to soak up, and it shouldn't go through the material as much. And if you're in a dry area, like a desert area, you may have to do that, more than once a day if it's super dry. Can I use the liquid from charging? Can I use the liquid from charging the biochar? Carmen, I'm not sure exactly what you're meaning by that. I don't know what you want to use the liquid for. I've heard that some state regulations criteria is only 5 parts per million for persistent herbicides for commercial composting companies, but as little as 1 part per million can have detrimental effects. Yeah, I haven't looked up that figure recently, and I don't know. I can't tell you what the regulations state. Only what I had mentioned that, if you're doing a test, the tests, and there's only one test, and I can't remember the lab, but that one goes down to 5 parts per billion. But most tests go down to 10 parts per billion. And like you had questioned here, and I had mentioned, persistent herbicides can affect plants at as little as 1 part per billion, not million, but billion. So that's why it's good to do a bioassay to test things. Is it okay to store worm castings in burlap sacks? You can, but you're going to run into trouble because the microorganisms in the vermicompost is going to start to eat away at your burlap sack. So I knew that was a possibility, and I tried selling vermicompost in burlap sacks, and when I was in Nashville, I sold it at a local hardware store. And after a few weeks, I had noticed a bag at home was like completely eaten on one side. So I had to go back to the store and buy them back from her and replace that. So burlap is breathable. It seems like a good idea, but because these microorganisms are made to break down organic matter, burlap's organic matter, and they're going to break that down and chew away at it. So I don't like plastic either, but unfortunately plastic, people are stuck with plastic bags for now. Question in another video, you mentioned that more than 20% worm castings can inhibit seeds from sprouting. Could you expand on that? I'd like to reproduce experiments. So worm castings have growth hormones that include things that are going to help the plant to grow, but also growth inhibitors or growth regulators. And because they have these growth regulators, which is part of these things are called auxins, AUXIN. And that's what the persistent herbicides that we were talking about affect in a plant. They affect the auxins, or these growth regulators. So because worm castings have these growth regulators in them, if you get more than 20%, and if you look at the book, if anyone's got the book Vermiculture Technology, it's a really expensive book, so you have to be a big worm nerd to really even want to buy it. But they discuss it in there at length for different studies where they get 50, 60% vermicompost, even 40%. And the more vermicompost you get, you start to get reductions in growth and problems with the growth of a plant. So, at 5%, you see this 5% of a material, you see this increase. At 10%, you see a bit of more of an increase, 15% a little bit more, 20% a little bit more. And then once you get above that 20%, things actually start to get worse and worse the more worm castings you have because of these growth regulators. And it's not something that's like harmful. It's not like a disease or anything like that. It's something that's in, you know, like all plants are going to have these types of things because they need to, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say a plant needs to know not to put out a seed at a certain time because of the weather or the conditions in the climate. So it'll have these growth regulators that will limit that growth. So it's not going to put out certain growth that will produce things that will, you know, send it out to seed or something like that. That's just an example. So that's why plants need growth regulators in different ways. And I can't think of other examples, but they're not necessarily bad. It's just that it's going to limit and inhibit growth with worm castings. Follow up on storing worm castings. What is the best method to store worm castings? Is it necessary to keep castings moist or wet? So we also did a whole live stream on this, and I would recommend that you go back and watch that to get all the details. Yes, you want to have keep worm castings moist. You don't want to allow them to dry out and dehydrate because that's going to cause you to lose a lot of your biology. It's good if you can use something that's somewhat breathable. You don't want to completely close things off from air. So store them. I don't want to, since we did a whole live stream, I'll let you go watch that. But make sure that you're keeping them somewhere where they're not going to dry out too much, but they have a little bit of breathability. And that may mean every now and then going in and spraying them down or misting them down a little bit to keep them moist. And the worm castings need moisture because microbes need moisture. That's going to keep your microbes active. In a worm bin, the worms also need that moisture. Hudson sprayer is what you're thinking about. Yes, thank you, thank you. Feeding watermelon to add moisture to my bins, uncover it with damp cardboard. Good suggestion. How do I know if I'm buying quality worm castings? You can get them tested. Depends on what you're wanting in quality. To me, quality worm castings would be good biology, so I would want to get them tested for, you know, an assessment of soil microorganisms. So that's what I do at the Urban Worm here. You can send in samples of soil compost, vermicompost, and I can test it for to count the biomass of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and then give you notes and feedback on that, on what, if it were your own, on what could be improved, or if you're wanting to buy someone else's, I could give you feedback on whether those are good or not. Someone says, I'm just finishing a bioassay on horse manure. Thankfully, it looks like everything checks out. Thanks for the session. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad that everything looks good. Some Raptors said it's worth the read. It is, although a lot in vermiculture technology, I believe that's what they're referring to. A lot of the experiments were replicated, and so you really read a lot of the same stuff over and over again. And Rhonda Sherman's book, The Worm Farmer's Handbook, she mentions different the important aspects of the research that was done in vermiculture technology, because she is also one of the authors on vermiculture technology. So reading the Worm Farmer's Handbook can save you a lot of headache of reading vermiculture technology, which is very heady and just a bunch of research. Someone asked, can you recommend a sustainable alternative to packaging worm castings for sale? I'm guessing you mean like what you can put them in. I know some people, and this can be hard to do, but if you're selling at like a local farmer's market on a smaller scale, people will do like a reusable bucket where, you know, they'll have like a 3-gallon bucket or something like that, and they'll sell the bucket. And then if people bring that back, then they may get a little bit off their next purchase or something like that. At this point, it's been a discussion. I've talked to so many people about, you know, types of packaging. And like I mentioned, for right now, the only thing is plastic or metal. Metal's heavy. So really, plastic. So if you can use plastic and then reuse plastic, there's no really sustainable thing that's going to be good to hold things, because any type of, the biodegradable plastics are going to be broken down by microorganisms and worm castings. So it's really hard. It's been a challenge because I don't want to sell things that aren't in sustainable packages, and it really limits things. Someone said Carmen, referring to the biochar. So after a few weeks of charging the biochar, I have lots of liquid left over. Can I use this liquid in a beneficial way as a foliar spray? If it's been sitting around for a few weeks, I would treat it rather questionably, just because you don't know what's blown in. I wouldn't consider it beneficial. It could be good, it could be bad. So I would just probably put it somewhere where, on grass or some plants that you don't really care about. Kevin asks, when container gardening, what is the recommended amount of castings to blend into your pot grow bag per gallon of container size? So Kevin, this is what I was just going over a couple questions ago, was that when you're mixing in worm castings or vermicompost, you want to keep it to 20% of the volume. So 20% vermicompost to whatever else is in the mix, 20% or less. Otherwise, you can start to have decreases in growth and things. Thomas says, I'm using pine shavings and compost as worm bedding. What ratios would you recommend for each? Well, that's hard to tell. I'd probably use 1 unit pine shavings, 1 unit compost, and 1 unit of food scraps. There's a lot of other variables in there, so it's hard for me to make a recommendation right now. But the pine shavings are going to add some bulk, and if it's just pine shavings, not like stable droppings or whatever, then you hopefully don't have nitrogen. It should just be carbon. And then compost, once it's finished, if you're mixing it in with something, can usually be more considered a brown material. Even though you've put browns and greens in there, at the finished product, it kind of is considered more of a brown material. So yeah, I would probably do 1 part of each of those. Okay. Looking for more questions here. Thanks, Mike and Troy, for the Hudson sprayer tip. Oops. Dang it. Sorry. I have a touch screen, so sometimes when I try to use my touch screen, it messes up the thing. Braxton, hey Braxton, if you had a plant tissue test for macro and micronutrients, are there key elements that would show low results due to herbicides and pesticides uptaking in the plants from the compost or soil? Braxton, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to give a wrong answer. So I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know where to point you to get you the best answer for that. So I'm sorry that I can't answer that. Taylor asks, could mason jars work on a smaller scale since one could reuse the glass? I'm not sure if you're meaning for worm composting, Taylor, or what it is that you're meaning to use it for. Brian chimed in. I use a mixture of 40% leaf mold, 40% aged compost, and 20% worm castings for my potting soil. It sounds like a good mix. Someone said adding predatory mites to kill the white adding predatory mites to kill the white mites in the bin have any drawbacks you're aware of? No, not that I'm aware of. Taylor said for sale. Could mason jars work on a smaller? For sustainable packaging? Yes, I got you. Yeah, I mean anything that's sustainable. Mason jars. Yeah, it's going to add to your cost. Having to buy a mason jar and then sell that mason jar, but that could be an option. Someone asked, can I use worm tea for new plants? Yeah, worm tea is great. It depends on what you're calling worm tea. But if you're mixing worm castings with water, clean water, then yes, that stuff is excellent for new plants or any plants. And with that, I've run out of questions. So I'm glad you all joined in today. I hope you all learned something. I hope it wasn't too confusing. And again, for any of you who had mentioned stuff from the other live streams, I urge you to go watch the persistent herbicide live stream. And there was that other question. And then if anyone's wondering about mites or other pests, we do have our blog post called the Big Book of Worm Bin Pests, or something similar to that, on our urban worm page. So you can go to urbanwormcompany.com and check out our blog post there. Anyway, with that, I will sign off. Next week, I had 2 ideas in mind. I was either going to go over dewormers or harvesting worm cocoons. I've heard a lot of talk about dewormers recently, and it's been discussion on posts on Facebook things and stuff like that. So I thought it might be a good thing to talk about, but I'll discuss it with Steve, and we will see you next Wednesday. So thanks again for everyone joining in, and have a good week. See you later.